Hi, I'm Brian Gladden, CFO at Zealous. You're listening to the CFO Thought Leader Podcast.
This is episode 1098.
I was really excited to get back into the health and wellness space. And I really enjoyed my time at Peloton and obviously as a banker at JP Morgan, I worked with some great companies in the health space as well. Planet Fitness was one of the companies I took public. So I just love the sector. And so I was fortunate to be introduced actually through a recruiter to the founder of Prenuvo, Andrew Lacey. And I think it was a little bit similar to when I met John Foley because it immediately clicked that this is a company to me that has the potential to redefine preventative health at scale. And I was so impressed. They have nearly 20 clinics around the United States today, aspirations to be a global brand. But to me, really, it's the mission, right? It's allowing people to take health into their own hands. And the hope of the company one day is that proactive screening is as ubiquitous as your annual physical.
When Peloton stock debuted in 2019, CFO Jill Woodworth believed the playbook was airtight. She had shifted fiscal calendars, resegmented reporting, and shaped statements that tell a story. Or so she explains. Then COVID hit. Orders flew ninefold overnight. Marketing was switched off, and customer focus narrowed to a single metric, getting bikes from order to doorstep. In this episode, Jill recounts that surge, the $800 million costs that reset that followed, and the leadership lessons she distilled. Those lessons now guide her new chapter at Prenuvo, where whole body MRIs and biomarker insights aim to make preventative health mainstream. You'll hear that story and much more on today's episode. Our talk with CFO Jill Woodworth begins after this.
When it comes to company spend, most finance teams are on defense, reacting to surprise spend, chasing receipts, saying no. But there's a better way. Meet Brex, the AI-powered spend platform that boosts a company's control, earnings, and speed. 99% of customer spend is compliant. 11 million hours saved on expenses and accounting through automation. $681 million plus dollars back to customers in business building rewards. Make every dollar count with Brex.
Hello, Jill Woodworth is with us. She is Peloton's former chief financial officer who guided its 2019 IPO, scaled finance through pandemic surges and recalls, following a dozen years at JP Morgan and another dozen years at Morgan Stanley. Jill, welcome. I should say Jill Woodworth is the newly appointed CFO of Prenuvo, and we look forward to chatting with you about that as well. That's just news here today. But Jill, we always like to begin by saying, take a look back for us and go back as far, and I saw it was MIT. If you wouldn't mind, you're at MIT. Are you already thinking finance? Who are you back then?
That's really funny because I think I went to MIT specifically for economics because I wanted to get into investment banking, and I don't know really where that idea originated from, but I loved math, I loved finance and management. And so unlike a lot of my peers at MIT who went there for engineering, I specifically went because it had at the time in 1990 the number one school in economics. So I knew it.
What, you step out and do you immediately join the workforce, or what is your plan?
You know, nowadays, right, people are preparing for their careers at the age of 10. I had the luxury of scooping ice cream and working in pizza parlors and answering phones and babysitting, you know, really up until, you know, I went into the workforce during my summers in high school and college. And so But I did, interview at investment banks, a couple of consulting firms. I sort of got self-selected into banking. It was a really interesting experience where the consulting interviews I found very frustrating, but the banking interviews were really to the point. They just wanted to know if I was going to work hard, and I had an interest in the industry. And so went right into a job at Morgan Stanley about a month after I graduated.
Well, I know that it looks like you've had a pretty exciting banking career. You lived in different parts of the world, I believe, or operated from different parts of the world for a while. Can you share with us what track were you on within these banks?
It was very different at Morgan Stanley and JP Morgan. At Morgan Stanley, at the time when I started in 1994, it was a very forward-thinking organization in that when they saw people with potential, they wanted to move them around a lot, right? So I got to do a lot of different things while I was there. I worked in derivative products when I started. Within the investment bank, I worked for a time in M&A. I worked in LA covering clients. When I raised my hand and accidentally said that I knew Japanese, I ended up in Tokyo for 5 months. And so it was just, I didn't really have a set plan, but I kind of went where people wanted to send me, and every experience was amazing. I spent time in Sydney, time in London, doing lots of different things. I like to say I had 12 different jobs in 12 years. But and then my journey at JP Morgan was very different. I was very keen to get into the consumer and retail sectors. And in fact, at that point, I thought, should I go into industry and take an operating role in a sector that I'm interested in, or just keep going in banking? And I followed a former colleague and went into JP Morgan and ran their equity capital markets business for consumer and retail companies for about 6 years, and then from a banking perspective. And that was incredibly joyful. I got to meet some of the most amazing companies, and had just an absolute privilege getting to know them and advise them, and worked on dozens of IPOs of household names. It was a lot of fun.
Can you give us a sense of, for those of us that may not be familiar, or listeners who might not know the cultural differences between these two banks or similarities, can you share with us what's distinctive from one to the next?
I think both are, Morgan Stanley was a great training ground for me. As I said, very into mobility, moving people around, promoting from within, a really incredible and well-run institution. But its primary business is really investment banking, asset management, sales, and trading. JP Morgan is different because it has, Chase, right? It has a whole commercial banking arm. It also has asset management and investment banking. And interestingly, as a retail banker, I was always looking for opportunities. How do I partner with the commercial bank or the credit card parts of JP Morgan so I can get better insights into the consumer and the retail environment that I can share with my investment banking clients. So it just operates at a very different scale and slightly more diversified, and have a ton of respect for JD Guinan and the management team there, and it was just a fantastic experience.
Again, it's almost as if you have these two volumes on a desk where you were in each of these banks, building your career, maturing as a professional. I'm wondering, did you become more assertive at some time during your career? During the early part, we're just trying to sort of understand how things operate very often. And then once you have that comfort level or confidence in your skills, you begin to really look for opportunities and raise your hand, perhaps. Can you give us some, how you evolve in terms of your assertiveness and perhaps the beginning of leadership skills emerge? Yeah.
I think at Morgan Stanley, you're right. When you're young, and your boss says, hey, I want you to go to London. I want you to, go to Japan. You do it because you think that they know what's best for your career. And what's interesting at JP Morgan, I went in with a little bit more intention to say, I love the consumer and retail sectors. I'm looking for a role within these particular industries. And you do get more assertive, but I'm going to say something that's going to come as a big surprise to you. The thing that really changed my mindset and I think made me a more successful banker was when I had my daughter.
This is interesting. Time management, what are you going to tell us? Yeah.
So my biggest, a piece of advice that I give people is that for you to be successful at your job, you need to care about something else in your life more than your job. And because I think sometimes if you're giving 100% to your job, you don't see the forest for the trees sometimes. And, you can sort of get too stressed and everything is riding on everything that you're saying and doing in a meeting or a pitch you lose or win or a deal. And I had my daughter during the financial crisis, interestingly enough. And when I came back from parental leave, I, was probably sleep deprived. I came back after 3 months. She was born in January of 2009. So right at the heart of it. And when I came back, all of a sudden, there was something else in my life I cared about. And I don't know what it was. And I think it was my love and wanting to spend time with her. But I was better at my job because I was 80-20. I was focused. I went in, I spent the time on things that I thought were important. I didn't spend time on the things that weren't important. And it gave me just purpose in life outside of just work. And I feel like I credit her with the fact that I feel like after that, I was just more confident and better. And I would, I'd have to do some really big pitches. I remember one in particular that I, was with Jamie Dimon in the meeting. And, my performance level just increased. And again, I think it's because I didn't put everything that it wasn't everything that I cared about. And if I lost, it was going to be okay. And sometimes when you put too much pressure on yourself, I feel like you don't perform as well in certain respects.
What a great point. I think it's been made differently to us, but it just sharpens your perspective on everything, really, I suppose. Having a family and starting a family. That's wonderful. Thank you for that. The Peloton CFO role was no doubt widely coveted. And with your resume, I think you were probably on the short list all along. But can you tell us a little bit about how you arrived there, whether it was a headhunter, part of your network? And of course, we all know that you're boarding a roller coaster with the COVID years ahead of you and all of the unique business that Peloton was.
I will say there was for the couple of years leading up to November 2017 when I met the founder of Peloton, Foley, there was a period of time where I started to think. I got a couple of clients who said, hey, would you be interested in an operating role? And I started to think hard about going down that path, but there really weren't any opportunities that were of particular interest to me. A mutual friend introduced me to John Foley. He was in the market looking for a new CFO. And I'm full of funny stories. This one's pretty funny. He actually called my boss at JP Morgan and asked if he could talk to me about a CFO role at Peloton. And so I heard about it first through my boss. And so, in banking, that's always a little tricky. And so my boss knew about it before I did. But he, obviously he said, I think this could be a really interesting opportunity for you. I went and I met John at a coffee shop. And within 30 minutes, I basically said, I'm done with my 24-year career in investment banking. And it's just there's so many different ingredients that make a good company. Obviously, the management team and having a brand that people love, and just everything that I could see at Peloton. I thought this is the right opportunity for me. So that was in November of 2017, and I started in January 20.
Wow. And it was clear to you as you step into the office, you're on the IPO path, and your first chapter is perhaps making it IPO ready, or how would you characterize your first role there?
Well, when I started, immediately got thrown into a fundraising process for their Series F raise. Which was incredible for me because it forced me, like drinking from a fire hose, to really understand the business. So I wasn't really thinking IPO for about a year. The first year, there was so much that I felt needed to change. Obviously, the business was doing around 200 million of revenue. It had a 12-person finance team. But the issue really was that I looked at the financials, I looked at the segments, I looked at where things were on the P&L, and I didn't understand the business from what I was looking at. And so the first thing I needed to do was come in, and I changed the fiscal year. I changed when the budgeting process was done because it didn't coincide with a good period of time from a business perspective. And I resegmented the business because, in my view, even though I know most people look at a P&L statement and they think, oh, this is just numbers, an income statement and financial statements, for that matter, should tell a story. You should be able to understand what's going on in the business by looking at the P&L. And so that's where I really was first initially wanting to get the business to a place where I can explain, very clearly to the board how the company is performing, what are the KPIs we need to be focused on, what really matters. And so I made a lot of changes in the first 6 to 9 months while we were doing the Series F to just change the way we were reporting and looking at the business. So was not focused on the IPO at that point. And
Was it
on a lot of hiring as well.
Yeah, I mean, was it getting your accounting team in shape? Was it making sure you had the controller and your FP&A responsibilities were mapped out? Or when you say you're getting the house in shape?
Oh, well, I have to say the team that was there, I mean, there are still people at Peloton today that are on that team, and some of the best people I've ever worked with. So it wasn't a quality issue with the team. Peloton was attracting amazing people to the company. It really was just augmenting those teams and figuring out, of course, as you then start to think about going public, okay, well, we need a team that's going to be doing our financial reporting to the SEC. We need an internal audit team. We now have a lot of money in the bank. We need a treasurer. Our tax situation, is going to get more complicated because we're going into Germany and Canada and London. And we obviously have manufacturing partners in Taiwan. I need a tax person. So it was really just a lot of hiring. And I was just very fortunate to attract literally the most amazing team. So very, very fortunate. And I think a lot of that is, the brand itself. There was a lot of purpose behind what people felt at Peloton because we were changing people's lives and making them healthier and happier. And that really resonated with the people that I wanted to hire.
Having helped take companies public in the past, but you weren't on the operations side. Any thoughts on, sort of rendering your first S1 from the operations side as a leader?
Well, I can tell you, had I done this before I was a banker, I would have been a 10 times better banker. Because it's very easy as an advisor to tell people, oh, you should go public, and here's why you should go public, and the process is so easy. It takes 6 months, and here's what you need to do. It's very different living through it. It was effectively like having a second job for about 7 months. And so it was very grueling, and I was probably the most painful client that Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan ever had, because I'd already been through the process. And so had very definitive views on how I wanted the process managed, especially I wanted to be very vigilant around the timeline. But yeah, it's so much work. And it takes a village. It takes so much coordination. But at the end of the day, it was such a great learning experience, because it made me, having write that S1, it made me have a much better understanding of all of the different parts of our business, and how to convey that in a very complicated business model in a very simple way.
All right. So I want to talk to you about Peloton. It's it was such an interesting company. I mean, I don't know, have they written a book about all of what you go through eventually? I mean, it is really exciting. And there were so many people speculating, how they would have, addressed some of the challenges that are to come during COVID. But I know that in 2019, and maybe we can begin here, in late 2019, Peloton invested heavily in manufacturing and logistics to shorten delivery windows. And I'm wondering, how did you model demand risk then? And what, in hindsight, would you change about some of the assumptions maybe that were made?
So about 6 months prior to COVID, we did buy one of our third-party manufacturers. But I think you have to take a step back and understand, we were working with a manufacturer in Taiwan. We needed them to scale. The company prior to COVID was growing 100% a year. And, by us owning them, it allowed us to invest more money in it so that it could eventually meet the scale that we need. So we didn't necessarily buy our manufacturer because of COVID. But it happened to be fortuitous, because 6 months later, when COVID happened, it obviously gave us the flexibility to build a lot more fitness equipment than we would have done had we not been vertically integrated there. And then on the point about our delivery network, that was a deliberate decision that we made. It was probably made around 2016. So even before I got there, if you, the member experience at Peloton, was the holy grail, was the most important thing that everybody at the company focused on. And if you looked at where we were letting our members down, it was in the delivery experience, because we were using third parties. They were plopping it on the doorstep. They were banging into walls. It wasn't a good experience. And so we felt, and at the time, the company felt that it was important, where we could get the scale to make it economically efficient, that we build our own delivery network. So that's just the backdrop. I mean, both of those things were things in motion prior to COVID. And, when COVID hit, though, overnight, our order volume grew ninefold. It's hard for a hard goods business to scale 9x in one day. And as a health and wellness company, and I think people have to put their mindset back to how people felt in those early days of COVID, right? It was scary. And I lived in New York City, right? It was it was a really crazy, uncertain time. People had never been in their homes under lockdown before. It was a once in a generation experience. And we had people just pleading and begging for some physical and mental outlet to get them through COVID. And so our decisions made to scale up whatever we could do with our third-party manufacturer, now our owned manufacturer, our delivery teams, we did it because we wanted to take care of our members, right? So at the end of the day, if that was really our guiding light around doing everything we possibly could to rise to that occasion. I think the other thing to keep in mind is there were so many other challenges at the time because e-commerce was exploding. So it's not even like we could have gone to third parties if we wanted our products delivered. So we really had to go it alone, but I think the entire management team was really behind the fact that we were doing this for the right reasons. And, yes, it had to be unwound. And I'm sure there were things that we should have done differently. But, when you're acting at a time when when you don't, it's so uncertain, and you think you're doing the right thing. It's just hard to it's so easy to play 20, have the 20/20 hindsight or play Monday morning quarterback. But I felt like, we really rallied together as an executive team. And meanwhile, of course, we're trying to figure out even how are our instructors going to do classes. We were moving cameras into their apartments. We were, moving our entire HQ into, a work from home environment. There was just, it was a lot. So of course we could have done things differently. And, the big strategic question there for us is, should we have just abandoned our members? Should we have not done that? And so, but I think it was the right thing to do. So I think that would have been the only other alternative, that we just left all of that demand on the table, and we weren't serving our members. And so I think that was really the balance we were trying to strike.
I'm wondering were there any finance controls or dashboards during that spike that you found useful, or that really helped with decision making? Or was it just, we're going to have to go on instinct sometimes? I mean, what was useful to you? What type of data under those circumstances were you seeking to?
Well, we turned off marketing right away. And, Peloton up until that point was a brand built in acquisition marketing, right? We spent money to acquire customers. I'm sure there was a point in time where nobody could avoid a Peloton commercial. And so, when you think about that, that was just all organically driven, right? And so usually I'm sitting there thinking about, how much marketing dollars are we spending, and what are we, and then what is that materializing in terms of sales? During COVID, it was just, showing up at the doorstep, as John Foley would say. And so from our standpoint, it was, we were very focused on order to delivery, right? Okay. When COVID first started, it was, oh my gosh, the bikes are at a 4 or 5, month wait. It was like, how do we get that order to delivery down, right? How do we ramp up manufacturing and get bikes on boats and planes and by every means we can? And how do we get them into hands as quickly as possible? And so I would say during that time, that was probably the thing that we were most focused on. What was our time delay between when our customers are ordering and when they're delivering, and when they're actually getting the product? And, we had to take it down from 4 or 5 months to, a week, over the course of several months. And it was a Herculean effort. There were bikes assembled in parking lots in Taiwan at one point. So we were doing all we could. But that was the thing that we were focused on. And then I think the other thing it's not in a dashboard, but the mental state of the employees, right? I mean, most people in COVID, businesses were dead, right? People were worried about job security. At Peloton, it was all hands on deck. It was a company that was about to go from, a couple $100 million of revenue to $4 billion. And so it was, we were asking so much of our people. We were hiring so many people. We were onboarding and digesting so much. To me, the other thing that I was keenly focused on was really staying very present with my team, probably even more so than I was doing in the office, because I had to be so intentional about doing it in an online forum, for a work from home forum. So I think it was just making sure we weren't forgetting to.
I just want to touch on the post-pandemic sort of demand reset. When growth cooled and inventory swelled, then which levers, price cuts, vendor renegotiations, financing, delivered the fastest liquidity or relief, however we can characterize that? What was the lever that you turned to?
Well, the first lever we turned to, which was lowering the price of our bike, but a lot of that was because we had already introduced a new bike model. It was called the Bike Plus at the time, and so our view was we had a lot of inventory of our original bike, and let's drop the price on that. And I think the price curve is less elastic than I think perhaps we had thought at the time. And obviously it created a lot of initial demand, but then that waned over time. But it's really hard to tell, in the COVID taper, how much was driven by pricing and how much was just driven by people wanting to now spend money on experiences. So it's a hard analysis, but I think coming out of that, once we knew we were in a position where demand was significantly tapering, the bigger issue was having to take a lot of strategic actions a lot around the business, which I can address later if you would like. But that was probably the moment, that was one of the most challenging at the company, was the realization that we had to really reinvent the business model.
I was going to ask, looking back, what structural changes in finance or FP&A would you recommend to help Peloton, as manage these demand swings?
I mean, I think it doesn't overlap, but I'm not sure that the issues that we've had could have been avoided unless we had a crystal ball. I mean, we saw sustained demand for nearly 2 years.
Yeah.
And so it was impossible to predict. And, again, then we started re-teeing up marketing. We started, obviously, looking at price elasticity. There were a lot of different tools, but I just don't think a lot of the issues that we had to unwind should have necessarily been avoided unless we had ever done any of that at all. Then we had left the demand on the table.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for answering some additional questions there on Peloton. We do appreciate it, Jill. And we do want to find out about your new chapter that you're opening, as we learned just this month, days into the job. Prenuvo. Tell us about this company. What's it about? What are its offerings?
Sure. Great. Well, Prenuvo is the leader in proactive screening. So what we do is we make whole body MRIs of our patients in less than an hour, and they get incredible insights into their health. We look at every organ, every joint, and they get a comprehensive report that's been written by a board-certified radiologist, and they learn more about their health in an hour than they've probably known their whole life. So from my perspective, it's in the field of preventative healthcare, and to me, this is really where I think our healthcare system overall needs to go.
Can you tell us a little bit? Is it a Series B, about its capital structure? How big a company is this now?
So we haven't shared valuation numbers, but we did share that we crossed the $100 million revenue mark in last year. I think earlier this year we had announced the closing of a Series B round.
And just for you, this is just another interesting chapter. Is it a founder who you connect? You shared an interesting story about Peloton. Similarly, is this another part of your network, or how did you arrive here?
I was really excited to get back into the health and wellness space. And I really enjoyed my time at Peloton and obviously as a banker at JP Morgan. I worked with some great companies in the health space. Well, Planet Fitness was one of the companies I took public. So I just love this sector. And so I was fortunate to be introduced actually through a recruiter to the founder of Prenuvo, Andrew Lacey. And I think it was a little bit similar to when I met John Foley, because it immediately clicked that this is a company to me that has the potential to redefine preventative health at scale. And I was so impressed. They have nearly 20 clinics around the United States today, aspirations to be a global brand. But to me, really is the vision, right? That's allowing people to take health into their own hands. And the hope of the company one day is that proactive screening is as ubiquitous as your annual physical.
Now, can you tell us what the opportunity, as you've just outlined for us? Are you here to scale it? What are your priorities for this company for the coming year?
Well, first I have to learn the business. And so I'm no help to anyone before I make sure that I am diving in and really understand every function. And it's been so fascinating so far just to hear about what our technology teams, our AI teams, our clinical teams, and what everybody is focused on. So for me, it's just really understanding the business. And one of the things that attracted to me to the business is there's so many different ways to grow. And new product offerings. The company just started doing blood biomarkers, and we're going to be rolling that across our clinics as well to augment the work that we're doing on the MRI. So just learning the business to me is paramount. I would say it's got a relatively small but mighty finance team today. So it's really just about figuring out where I need to add folks to the team. And in my experience, both at Peloton and then my time at Elation, the most important thing is figuring out how to create a finance function that is serving the organization, that it's not a siloed organization where they're just accounting and doing budgets in a silo. I truly love when the finance team is really integrated with the different functional areas of the business. So my desire is to build a team where, our head of our clinical practice doesn't want to be in a meeting without his, finance strategic partner. So I really want to make finance a truly ingrained part of the business because I think it helps everyone make better decisions, and it always makes sure that our executive teams have all of the information they need and analysis they need to make good decisions. I myself want to become hopefully a strategic partner to the CEO and the rest of the team as we look at different growth opportunities, new products, different market expansion. This is stuff that really gets me excited, especially when it's a company that's saving lives through early findings of things that, had they progressed without them knowing, being asymptomatic, could be a big problem in the future. And then, of course, as a CFO, I would be remiss without saying that I need to make sure that the company has the necessary balance sheet and operating plan, and predictability and forecastability of the business. and plan to give the company hopefully every available option to them in terms of capital raising, strategic initiatives and partnerships that they want to embark on and get, just make sure they have that as the full optionality and that financing never are constrained.
Help us better understand what the important information that you need to understand and be able to see into the business. What is it that allows you to understand how they're performing?
Well, I think, first off, it's a pretty scaled business already with almost 20 clinics. Those clinics are profitable. The company is profitable. So I think it's obviously going to be important for me to keep an eye on clinic performance, right, within the four walls and making sure that we're making good decisions on the locations in which we are putting our clinics. And I think understanding the capacity and the ebbs and flows, it's a relatively new business. And so I guess I'm answering your question with another question to myself, which is, I still think we're trying to figure out, right, the seasonality, right, and the repeat visits of customers. There's still a lot to figure out. We're incredibly encouraged because I do think it's a massive secular trend that people want to look after themselves. I mean, the health and wellness industry globally is a $7 trillion industry growing to $9 billion. And so and that's just in the span of the next few years. And so we're so new, and we have so much to go in terms of building brand awareness and frankly education that this is even an option for people in healthcare to take control and put themselves in the driver's seat. So while there's things that I can look at and revenue and profitability metrics and clinic performance, I think the real things in terms of honing the model and getting to have a very robust forecast is over time, just being able to better model the predictability of when people are going to return and what does seasonality look like in Florida versus New York? When are people going to want to be doing these things? And it's very hard too when, we've got different sales channels that we're growing very rapidly. But so I think it's going to evolve. And then I would say the two other things that are super important to me is how our customers feel about us, right? How is our NPS tracking? Are people having a great experience? I mean, so much of this business was built because people absolutely had a fantastic experience, told their friends. I kind of liken Prenuvo to the next Peloton in the way that people used to, they would talk about their favorite instructors at a dinner party. I think, 5 years from now, it's going to be, oh, well, what did your scan say? And what are you doing to better your scan next year? And by the way, I went through the scan process as part of my diligence process when I took the role, and it was absolutely fascinating. Again, I learned more in an hour than I did in a lifetime of seeing doctors.
Sort of what you're explaining there, isn't it? Sort of the customer experience is what you really want to begin to understand better. And we talk about customer success with a lot of SaaS firms. And I'm curious if customer success means something different to you and whether similarly you envision having something of maybe you already do have and I don't know if healthcare is different, but a customer success team and resources dedicated to, tracking and understanding these behaviors more closely. Is that going to be part of your world already is?
I think, the thing that, if you think about it, it is different than SaaS, right? There isn't, necessarily troubleshooting. It might be helpful for me to explain what happens. Effectively, when you sign up for a scan, you fill out a long medical history form that's super obviously helpful to put your findings into context. You then go for your scan. It's actually a very pleasant experience. I've never been in an MRI before, but it was less than an hour. I watched Netflix the whole time. And then about a week later, a very knowledgeable doctor called me, and at the same time delivered a very detailed report. And, there are 8 ways that I can follow up with Prenuvo if I have more questions. Maybe all my questions aren't coming to mind in that 45-minute call, but it was incredibly comprehensive, went through everything from, brain all the way down to feet, everything going on in my body. And, the follow-up was also a bit on me, right? I'm now doing some physical therapy because they identified some things in my back. I obviously gave a copy of it to my GP. And there's a few things that I can follow up on, but it from the Prenuvo perspective, it's just making sure that all of that feels seamless, right? And super high quality, and that the information and the insights and the findings and the technology is giving the customer incredible value. And so it's not really customer success. It's just making sure that experience is the best it can possibly be. And there's certainly markers along the way, right, that we want to measure how we're doing on that front. But it's a fairly common process at this juncture.
We want to quickly just touch on AI with you. And of course, we're wondering if, as you get to know this company, how are they using AI, in what areas, and whether you see, strong reasons to invest more in these types of technologies. What would you tell us?
So AI is pivotal to the business. It is helping us accelerate scan analysis. It enhances the quality of our report. And it's not replacing radiologists by any means, but it is enabling us to be more scalable and frankly, more precise with our findings. And so we really see AI and our radiologists working together because we're making their life easier by creating the technology that allows them to read clearer, better scans and allows them to work more productively. And so we do think over time, again, we're not replacing radiologists, but I do think AI is going to help us reduce not only the time it takes to scan someone, but the costs associated with our scan. And so, in the way future, right? I mean, the hope is that we can bring down the cost of this service over time. And that's obviously one of the ways in which we are making it ubiquitous. I will say, as we get even better and are able to invest more in AI, I do think as patients return annually or biannually, AI is going to play an even more powerful role in this. Hopefully there are some interesting product things that we can talk about in the future, but AI will become more powerful because it may be able to offer better insights into how the body is changing over time with age. Think about it. If I looked at a scan from you for a couple of years, and then maybe AI can really help me project out, for example, what your spine might look like in 10 years or 20 years. And then what are some ideas that you could have that actually might stem some of those negative changes? So I think it's just not a one-time diagnostic service. It could actually be something that has real value over someone's lifetime. And that'll compound with scale. And we have the largest data set of full body scans of anyone. And so I think that's also a hugely powerful research tool as well. And our founder gets calls about it all day long about how we can partner with people because of that incredibly structured, vast database that no one else has.
What about the finance function? Where do you think AI is likely to have the greatest impact? And again, we know you're a new arrival there, but how widely AI is being used today. We're curious to have you look forward as you begin to understand the possibilities here. Where is it likely to impact your finance function?
Hopefully there'll be a point where you write board decks for me. And
That'd be nice.
financial reports
Yeah.
and eventually, earnings scripts. And I mean, obviously, I think the technology, in places like finance, I think are going to be fairly obvious over time. I think, as I said, ultimately it's probably just cutting out a lot of rote work where we're, here's all of our financial numbers in our ERP, and AI is going to take that and put it into a presentation for me someday, right? So we're obviously not there, but I do see over time it probably it's like I kind of liken it to when I was an analyst in banking, right? I used to have to walk over to a Bloomberg terminal, write down a stock price, and then go put it into a spreadsheet. Right? Nobody would fathom doing that today. I think with AI and finance, I don't think we can actually fathom how much of our work is going to, and then you kind of think, well, what are we going to do if we don't do these things? Like, I mean, but somehow as an analyst in banking, they always found more work to do when technology was making huge strides and leaps, making our jobs easy. There was always work to do. So I'm sure there will be something, but hopefully what it means is that people in finance, especially at the lower levels, are doing more value-added work. Right. And, in startups and things, there's a lot of manual work, right? Systems are often patched together. And so hopefully that's where we'll see the leverage. But I think it'll probably take some time to get there.
Yep. Well, we are up to our finance strategic moment question. This is where we ask you just to share a story or an experience during your career where you had a moment of insight, and comes to mind when we ask for a finance strategic moment.
I think for me, it's a bit of a aha moment, or a moment where you say, "Oh my gosh, we have to do X right now." Like and it's a memorable moment, if you will, right? And so for me, I know we talked a lot earlier about, we talked a little bit about the taper, but, what it all had to then culminate to is, well, how are we going to start to fix this, right? The demand is starting to taper. We obviously have a lot of supply. We've already sort of played around with price. That's not really going to move the needle. And, we have to think really big about something that is always the hardest moment of any company, which is we've hired a lot of people that we don't necessarily need anymore. And we added a lot of fixed costs into a business that we need to, in fact, revariabilize. And so there was this moment, and, John called me, and obviously we had to get the senior leadership team together, and we had to come up with a strategy to take $800 million of costs out of the business. And, it was something we worked on in, call it December and January of, that would have been 21, 22. And then in February, it's because, of course, as a public company, you're on the time clock. And I had an earnings call that I needed to do by early February. So to think about a restructuring of that magnitude and a company so vertically integrated with supply chain and member support and delivery people and people that worked in the studio and corporate and marketing and finance and people and legal, it was a Herculean effort, but like we just knew at that moment, we're like, we have to do something now, and we have to announce it in February, and we have to figure this out, how to restructure across this entire organization. And so it, the strategy behind it, we were a little bit under the gun, right? It was far more challenging. For better or for worse, Peloton was a name that everybody was writing about. We were still in the news every single day about something. And so it was really, it was hard. And then, of course, 3 days before that earnings call, the board replaced the CEO. And so that was getting announced on the same day as the restructuring. So, it was a lot of change for me at once, but, obviously very stressful, but it was just a moment where you just said, we have to change, right? And it kind of goes, I think, to something I would say if someone was to, give me advice, I would probably say, don't, keep wishing, right? Face the reality, and because the last thing any company wants to do is cut their workforce. So it was hard. It was a hard moment, but the company got through it, and I'm still massively rooting. I'm still a huge Peloton user. I love the platform, the brand, the instructors, everything about it. But yeah, it took some years off my life.
And think about you stepping into that role for the first time, the CFO role for the first time, again, after this long banking career, as many CFOs as you had met, as many of them as you, as much as you thought you understood about what they do with their days. What is it that surprised you that initial 30 or 60 days as you stepped into the role? What is it that you were like, I didn't expect this? Yeah.
So how great it was. Because I was so used to having people that I would train be with me for a year or two and then go off and leave and go to private equity or go to a VC or go back to business school. It was amazing to think I have this team, and I have this team I can grow, a team I can mentor, and all of the things that I felt like a fish out of water as a banker as finally just came into view for me. But I know that's not the answer you're looking for, because that's a very personal answer. I think what I would rather say is, at Peloton, obviously prepare for the unexpected, right? No, nobody was, and you could never prepare for a black swan event. I get that. But I think, stress test assumptions, convince your CEO that you need to look at a downside scenario. Well, what if things don't go as planned? Raising money when you can, not when you need to, act quickly to course, like all of these things, obviously happened. But I think, you get in companies, especially young companies that are growing quickly, and you just always kind of think it's going to be a little bit up and to the right. I think that's changed a lot now in the last few years with the more challenging macro, but there have been periods of time where there's some people that have only seen the good times. And I think it's just important to keep in mind, right, that there's always a downside, and always good to make sure you can operate the company and you have sufficient capital under a very wide variety of circumstances.
We'd like to ask our guests to reflect a little on the personal side for us. We're wondering if there's something, and you're new there, so there's lots of things your colleagues might not know about you, but what's something generally maybe many people don't know about you?
Well, I already mentioned Japan, so people then will probably know that I know a little Japanese. I think I can play any song on the piano by ear.
Wow. And that goes way back to your piano lessons in high school, or I don't know.
I played since I was about 3 years old and had lessons till I was about 16 or 17, but I hated being told what to play and how to play it. So I would hear a song on the radio and I would go and I would I would
Figure it out. Yeah.
figure it out.
Wild.
What I love to do.
What a wonderful,
One day I'll be working in a piano bar and not be.
yeah. Do you, yeah, like in your office, do you keep, you have a piano obviously in your home, but I mean, do you escape with it?
No.
Is it work or is it fun? Yeah.
Oh no, it's just relaxing and fun.
I'm wondering if there's been a resource or a book along the way that, as far as business is concerned, maybe you escape with it. Maybe it's a novel or something. But no, I'm always interested in a resource or a book that has influenced your thinking in some way.
I'm going to go with a book I read about a year ago called Die with Zero. And it talks about how in life you need to maximize your happiness, not your wealth.
Nice.
It doesn't say not to make money or tell you when to retire, but it tells you to. It was very, very enlightening. So.
Just called it up. Bill Perkins is the author. We haven't had it before, so we're excited. We're always pleased when we get a new selection. So thank you for that. And again, we are up to the hour, so I have one last question for you. And again, I'm going to ask you to look forward for the coming 12 months. And just to ask you to be specific, if you can, what are your priorities?
Well, I want to build a strategic finance function. The company, has been probably more heavily focused on back office accounting and making sure the books are closed. I think from my perspective, the company has so many different ways to grow. I want to make sure I have the team and the resources for the executive team to look at ROI. Hey, should we open here or should we open? Where is a dollar better spent, right? How to evaluate different product offerings. And so I really want to build out a strategic function so that, we're not just using gut, we're also using some numbers and the guts worked so far. And frankly, this is an incredibly talented, super smart team. I just want to help now that the company is getting to a particular point of scale, help them, validate, if you will, the decisions that we make going forward. And so I'm really excited to build out that strategic finance function and be a spokesperson for the team because I truly believe that this is a life-changing product.
Jill Woodworth, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Right. Thank you.